Just to remind the interjection that we are trying to make the link between what Cobbett is saying and the current situation. So it seemed to me that was entirely appropriate. But if you switch the coin over, you also get some rather strange things connected with being rich and the position of the rich. And I know Mr. Cobbett wrote something about the rich.
Well, sir, as all here present will know, I never wrote nor spoke against the wealth of our ancient families and great landowners where I saw that wealth used wisely and well. I mean, not for their benefit alone, but for the benefit also of the labourers who keep them in that happy state. Mind you, again, I will read to you an address from my address to the journeymen and labourers of England, Wales, Scotland and Ireland, published in my register in 1816. I wrote, whatever the pride of rank, of riches or of scholarship may have induced some men to believe, or to affect to believe, the real strength and all the resources of a country ever have sprung and ever must spring from the labour of its people. And hence it is that this nation, which is so small in numbers and so poor in climate and soil compared with so many others, has for many ages been considered the most powerful nation in the world. It is the most industrious, the most laborious, and therefore the most powerful. Elegant dresses, superb furniture, stately buildings, fine roads and canals, fleet horses and carriages, numerous and stout ships, warehouses teeming with goods. All these and many other objects that fall under our view are so many marks of national wealth and resources. But all these spring from labour. Without the journeymen and the labourers, none of them would exist. Without the existence of their hands, the country would be a wilderness, hardly worth the notice of an invader.
I'd like Mr. Jones to comment on that, but just to remind you that in about 5 minutes we will have some questions and observations on these comments. So would you like to comment on the,
well, I mean,
the other side of the coin?
That's a timeless and essential point. This idea of those with wealth, those who dominate our society, that's to do with their own individual endeavour and success. When you can't understand, of course, the wealth, this is a very wealthy society, all too often concentrated in very few hands, without understanding the contribution of all of us as a society, whether it be the real wealth creators, working people who keep our society ticking day after day with their hard graft by hand or by brain, the people who, in the factories, the offices, the supermarkets, the people who keep all of these businesses running. And without that, of course, the wealth wouldn't be created. Now, this is such a topical point because we have this debate at the moment about tax and tax justice. And the debate is because of the refusal of certain large companies to pay tax. And what they do is they go against the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law. That's the difference between tax avoidance, which is legal, and tax evasion, which is not. And the argument there is we should change the loopholes that exist, which is, of course, absolutely true, but it's still a choice. Certain companies choose to hunt down and exploit those loopholes, other companies don't. So we have these large accountancy firms that exist in modern Britain, which are up to their neck in industrial tax avoidance. They're seconded to the government, they help draw up the tax law, then they tell their clients how to avoid the very laws they themselves have written in the first place. Can you imagine benefit claimants seconded to the Department of Work and Pensions to draw up legislation on social security, let alone, of course, benefit cheats? Of course, that's absurd. And the reason this is unjust is because, for lots of reasons, but one, take the small businesses, the local coffee shop or the local bookshop. Now, they have to just pay their taxes. If they get their tax form wrong, the tax authorities will come knocking on their door pretty quickly. They can't charge themselves for using their own logo, then offset it against tax. They can't route their sales via low-tax jurisdictions like Ireland. They can't offset losses from foreign entities and put them on their books in this country. They just have to pay their tax, and they're at a competitive disadvantage because they're driven out of business by many of these big businesses that refuse to pay their taxes in the way that they are expected to, because they can't exploit those loopholes. Now, the reason it's so relevant, of course, to what Mr. Cobbett over there says, is because there's almost a sense that tax is it's like a charity, that they're just, these companies are paying it out of the goodness of their own heart, that as well as the collective labour, of course, of those they depend on infrastructure provided by the state, like roads and rail. They depend on research and development. I have an iPhone here, which is smashed, but this iPhone, the touchscreen technology, Siri, the voice that speaks to you when you can command it, the GPS, the internet, are all public sector innovations. They all came through publicly funded research that these companies all depend on. Whether it be, of course, law and order that protects their property, whether it be an education system that trains up their workforce, whether it be the in-work benefits, the welfare state that exists to top up the wages of their workers, which cost billions of pounds every year because their wages are too low. They're paying too few wages. We could go on. All of these companies depend on the largesse of the state and the labour of people who work for them. And therefore, their side of the bargain is they should contribute accordingly. Now, many of them simply refuse to do so. So that's the point we should make. The other is, what sort of society do we live in where, as I've said before, where most people in poverty and work earning their poverty, whilst during an economic crisis, when things are not getting better in terms of the economy, the wealth, collective wealth is decreasing, but the wealth of the top 1,000 people can double. That is a dysfunctional society. It's a dysfunctional economy. It's an economy rigged in favour of a tiny elite rather than the interests, of course, of the majority. And that costs. We all have to pay money. We all have to pay billions of pounds every year to top up people's wages as a consequence, where the gap between workers and CEOs has exploded in size in the last 20 years. Now, we can pretend CEOs are working, 50 times harder than they were in the late 1990s. I don't think there's any evidence to suggest that's the case. But again, you have a society rigged in their favour, where even before the crash happened, even before 2008, the wages of millions of workers were either stagnating or falling, with terrible consequences for the economy. People not spending money, because when low-paid workers get money in their pockets, they go out and spend it. Whether it be more and more personal debt, a recurring theme, of course, of the 19th century, as people try to top up their living standards, and whether it be more and more money spent on in-work benefits. So these are social injustices that didn't just explode in a spectacular way after 2008, but actually are to do with the way society is run long before then. So that's why these problems were getting worse and worse. So the argument when it comes to the rich, to big business and all the rest, is you can't just look at success as being an individual flourish of individual talent. Of course, talent plays its part. It's a collective endeavour. And if it's a collective endeavour, our society should be run to recognise that fact. And that means rich people paying taxes properly, paying their workers properly, because if we don't have that society, then we have a society that's not run in the interests of all of us, but run as a playground for a tiny elite. That's what existed in the 19th century. We were supposed to abolish that, but we've been marching back to that for a very long time indeed.
Thank you.